Welcome to Reach, your platform to connect with other executive assistants and acquire game-changing knowledge and perspective. Reach is designed to inspire your workday, guide you through pivotal moments in your career, and transform you into the executive assistant you've always wanted to be. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Reach. This is your host, Jessica Van, founder and CEO of Maven Recruiting Group, and I am joined today by Eliza Leoni. How are you, Eliza?
I'm great. Happy to be here.
Great. Thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited about this conversation. It's definitely a pivot from our usual content, and it's going to be, I think, a really interesting discussion with lots of great takeaway tools for our EA listeners. So thank you for joining us. So today we'll be talking about, as I mentioned, a very powerful tool, which is the tool of driving change through communication and specifically through narrative. Eliza is an expert in. So as executive assistants, you're, as you know, not just supporting the leaders responsible for setting the vision, but you're also often the ones helping to shape and reinforce the story that keeps teams aligned, that keeps teams motivated, engaged, doing their best work, moving forward, or helps keep them centered and aligned during periods of tumultuousness or crisis, right? Which is often when narrative plays a really, really particularly strong role in the discussion. So whether we're navigating uncertainty or we're managing sensitive communications or influencing without the formal authority to do so, which is a lot of what executive assistants have to do, an EA's role in storytelling is often absolutely critical to the organizations and executives that they serve. So Eliza, as I mentioned, is an expert in this. She is a senior consultant at Decker Communications, where she coaches senior leaders on high-stakes communication, whether it's presenting to large audiences, whether it's managing a period of change, influencing up, or even just how to have a more effective, difficult conversation. For those who don't know, Decker Communications was founded in 1979 by Burt Decker. He is a former documentary filmmaker, and Decker serves a diverse clientele, which includes many of the world's most admired companies such as Google, Morgan Stanley, Microsoft, Netflix, and Cisco. Once again, welcome to the program, Eliza. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. So happy to be here, especially with this specific group and the specific challenges that EAs face. I'm in awe of everything that you all do, so I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
First question for you is, executive assistants are often thought of as extensions of their executives, whether it's in terms of decision-making or whether it's acting as a proxy for them in meetings or conversations, ghostwriting, or even just in amplifying the agenda and the objective of the executive across the organization. So given your expertise in shaping company and executive narrative, how do you think an executive assistant as an extension can have impact there?
What's so key about your role as an EA is that you see things that nobody else does. You see things that the executive's listeners don't see, and you even see things that the executive doesn't see, especially regarding the executive's own story. Because you're side by side with this person day in, day out, you're viewing their whole story, their whole day to day through an outsider's lens. And that can be so valuable for an executive. A lot of my job is coming in to work with an executive and saying, hey, what's a story you can tell that underscores this larger change narrative? Can we pull a personal story? Can we pull a story from that meeting 2 weeks ago? And a lot of times they're like, what story? I don't have a story. This is where EAs can be so helpful because you're the viewer. Mm-hmm. I have a friend who's an EA to a CEO. She just keeps a notes app open with logging stories. Like, oh, this happened last week. This could be useful. So that she can be that voice in the room when the executive's going, I don't know how to talk about this, or I already said this. How come they're not getting it? She can be the voice who goes, hey, what about that story of the Little League game 2 weeks ago? It sounds silly, but as long as a story goes back to the larger change narrative, shows that we can work through difficulty, we can work towards that, through that hardship, toward a greater goal, it can be relevant. I personally would love to have a story spotter in my life who's just telling me, hey, that's interesting, that's not. Because for all of us, we view our own stories as kind of boring or old hat. You're the outsider that can really see alongside the executive what might be valuable. So, so critical to just write down stuff as you see it so you can be that voice for them.
Yeah. Well, I think like what you're talking about is the act of bearing witness.
Yeah.
And I think that that is so key to what EAs do is you are the eyes in the room, the ears in the room, the one, to your point, cataloging and recording. You're the record keeper, right? Of the
Yeah.
stories of the organization. And it's so easy to forget. You're moving so quickly, things are happening, you're assimilating so much new content all the time that it's really easy to forget those moments or those situations that you can then to really, drive your point home, right? So I think like this idea of bearing witness is really helpful in thinking about the role of the EA in narrative and the construction of narrative. But I also think like something else that you said, and maybe you can talk a little bit more about this, is like identifying the blind spots. And I think that that's too one of the often the things that is difficult for an executive is they're not aware of the blind spots. And I think a lot of times the lens that EAs can offer that's so vital is helping them to see that. Can you talk a little bit about how blind spots can impact narrative?
Blind spots are absolutely everything in communication. The first thing that I do with anyone I'm working with is analyzing their audience, going deep. And a lot of times executive will say like, oh yeah, I know my audience, this and this. And I'm that annoying person who goes, do you really know them? Wait, tell me more about that. You think they're going to nod their head to that? Really? And pushing them a little bit. That's my role. You as an EA know your relationship with your executive. So that's first and foremost. Is your executive comfortable with a little push? Are they defensive around that? You have your own language with them. But in that context, know that you really go from an assistant to a partner when you're able to help them spot those blind spots. Because ultimately, if they're not seeing something and they're functioning and everyone's telling them to their face, this is great, and it's not, it will all come crashing down. It might be days, it might be months, it might be years, but it will. And if you can figure out a way within the context of your relationship to push them a little bit to see that, whether it's just asking open-ended questions like, hey, how do you feel about that? How do you think that went? Whether it's just keeping your ear to the ground. I mean, an example for me is just breaks after someone speaks. What am I hearing and what am I not hearing? Because sometimes it's just as bad to hear like, oh, that missed the mark, as it is to hear nothing because it's not resonating. So you can be the keeper of all that and then get strategic about how and when you share it with your executive so that they can kind of see the forest for the trees and actually be in a position to succeed. So risky, but they'll walk away ultimately feeling that you're more of a partner, that you're going to ascend in your power and in your role with them.
Right. Risky for the assistant, you feel, in
Yes.
offering that kind of feedback?
Yeah, I would love to say that every executive is eager for feedback, can't wait to get it. That's the future we all hope for. But reality can be different. We're all human beings and it's natural for us to get defensive, especially someone who has ascended to a role where people are telling them routinely that they're very powerful, that what they're doing is great.
Sure.
So you do have to be diplomatic and political. And I think that everyone listening to this knows this way better than me of how they're using their relationship with their executive. But it is that kind of those risky moments that are a little sweaty that tend to deepen a relationship ultimately. Make you more trusting.
What are some of the blind spots that you consistently see in the patterns of executives that you work with? And secondly, how do you approach, because I'm sure in your role, you have to approach executives as well and saying, hey, I feel like this would land better if yada, 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 yada. What strategies have you found for offering feedback in a way that doesn't provoke defensiveness? So 2 questions.
First of all, specific and sincere praise. Everybody needs it. Everyone needs it from everyone. It doesn't matter if this person seems like they're lofty and confident. I promise they are worried, they're anxious, they're feeling the heat of the board on them or the public or the press. So you being that voice that offers regular, specific, and sincere praise. Notice I'm saying specific and sincere because those words are so important. Great job. That went so well. Doesn't really do anything for anyone. But saying, hey, I noticed how you've changed the way that you're framing the change that we're looking at. And I think it's resonating because I saw this person who last week kind of looked shut down. I saw them lean forward a little bit and nod. And now the executive's getting that tangible thing that builds trust, just to know that you're on their team. It has to be sincere. So that's a huge asterisk there too, because I've seen a lot of people get kind of sycophantic and complimentary. People don't trust that either. So find the thing that you can sincerely praise. It doesn't have to be a big production, big fawning. It can just be super quick and specific. And then they'll really start to respect your opinion. That way, when you have that baseline of, hey, we have a relationship that I've given you a lot of specific and sincere praise, those moments that you go, hey, I kind of felt like that slide, we lost people a little bit. How did you feel? Then you have a little bit more room for that because you have that baseline of care. In the coaching that I do with clients, I'm always looking for balance. And that's not just because I want to compliment them and make them like me or anything like that. It's because our brains can only handle so much criticism. Even the most bullish person who walks into rooms is like, I can take it. They're just as likely to get their hackles up, get defensive. So I'm looking for those opportunities. And then you talked about blind spots. It's just so important to know that every single human being on this earth has more blind spots than they have visible spots. I do talking right now. There's things about the way that I'm speaking that are ignoring. Someone in the audience is like, how could she say that? I don't think that makes sense. There's always going to be something I don't understand because I'm only one person and I only have one view of the world. Your executive is exactly the same. They don't see a lot. Number one, because people just want to bring their best self to them and they want to bring their most complimentary self to them. That's just sustaining your job, sustaining your role, of course. So there is flattery that goes into it that leads to them not being able to see those things. People just don't necessarily bring the whole picture to executives. The executives that I've worked with that are really successful at limiting their blind spots are people that ask those open-ended questions like, what could I do better? And they hold silence and wait. And they ask that question every single week for 2 years before someone will say anything. You as an executive assistant are not necessarily in the position to force or push the executive to do that kind of reach out. But what you can do is really keep your ear to the ground and keep building that relationship so that you can find those moments. And start with a question. I like what and how questions versus why. Why did you do it that way? It didn't land well. That'll get people defensive. But just, what do you think about that? And then just give them space. Don't try to lead them anywhere. Pause, hold that stillness. And then a lot of times the thing they need to see will bubble up for them. So you don't have to be the one to say it.
I really like that. What and how versus why.
What can we do to underscore the larger change narrative here?
Yeah.
Just reminders that aren't confrontational or pushy.
What are common narrative pitfalls that you see during times of change? And the change could be good change, right? Change is not always a bad thing, right? Change can be good change. This is happening. This is great.
Yeah.
So what are the common narrative pitfalls and how do you think an EA can use their role to mitigate?
Number one problem is misalignment between where the executive is and where the audience is on a change. Every change has a path. So let's say we start in the bottom left corner with total ignorance that the change even needs to happen. And at the top right corner, we've changed for the better, for the worse, for the middle, and it's in the rear view. Once an executive is announcing that change, they are almost to the top right corner. They're nearly there. They see the finish line. They're already feeling their muscles burning because they've been working on this for a while. So they see the finish line. Now they have to turn around and say to the starting line, hey, come over here. Let's run. Because of where they are and because they're already kind of fatigued, it's so frustrating. When all of a sudden all the people at the starting line are, but we don't want to. We like the way things are over here. We've been doing it this way for a while. Even if it's painful, even if it sucks the way things are before, they're used to it.
Yeah.
And so there's this huge gap. And what I see the most is executives speaking to their audience as though they're right behind them instead of miles behind. that disconnect leads to frustration for the executive. So the biggest thing that happens is like, I can't believe they don't get this. Like, it's your job, just do it. I can't believe we have to have this conversation again. That kind of frustration leads to messaging that won't land. Because when we start saying to the audience, hey, just get on board, like it's over, we need to move on, that's when people start to take even more or start to kind of build barriers when there aren't any. Go like, hey, this is a huge problem when it's not. That is emotional. It's not based on the actual problem at hand. So an executive assistant is in an amazing position to remind their executive of that disconnect and make sure that the message matches the beginning. Again, it goes back to asking questions like, let's put ourselves in their shoes. How do you think they'll receive this message? And remind them. And then a huge thing that you can do for an executive is just give them the space to vent all that frustration because it's going to go somewhere. I love working with executives who are like, nope, I can handle it. I got it. I'm not emotional. And I'm like, ugh. You are. We're all emotional creatures. So where's that emotion going to come out? If you're not giving it space, where is it going to come out? I hope not at the all hands. So what could happen is you could just be that person who's like, hey, this is so frustrating. And then just pause. And they can say, yeah, it's frustrating, but we're going to move forward. And they can say like, yeah, you know what? We already talked about this. Just give them that space. It might not feel like productive time, but it absolutely is because you can be that safe space for the person so that they can then go to the next meeting kind of feeling like, all right, like, yeah, it sucks, but my head's back in the game.
Yeah.
Such a valuable service for you to offer.
Right.
Huge impact on an organization and a change.
Yeah. I think that's so key. I really like the framing there, Eliza, around, oftentimes, like to your point, these changes, they're not happening overnight. If it's an acquisition, this acquisition has been in talks for probably 2 years, right? Or longer. You've been going through diligence rounds and phases and phases and phases of negotiation, which most of the broader company is not privy to. So when the exec announces, hey, bada bada boom, and everybody's like, wait, oh my God, my job, right? And why aren't they with me on this? And so it's like, it's that acceleration of going from 0 to 100 instantaneously that I think is a really good point to remember and to help the executive unpack that and relate to the fact that this has been happening for you for 2 years, but for them it's happened yesterday. So
yeah. And I love what you just did in your body language of like, hey, like that is how executives like to approach changes. They're like, I know people are going to be defensive and they're going to push back. So I'm just going to blast them with positivity.
Right. Get the symbols and yeah.
Right. It's like, get the symbols out, like cue the music, brr, 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 and everyone's just like, what?
Yeah.
You said, what does this mean for my job? Which is the only thing that most people care about internally. Externally, what does this mean for my stocks or my product? But internally, and executives aren't even there. They're thinking about, hey, what's the profits of the business? Like, how are we looking on the balance sheet? Employees care about their job. So it's that like constant level of disconnect that is natural. It doesn't mean that you're a bad communicator. It means that we need to spend time analyzing the audience before we can do anything else. EAs are a great person to just remind them of that. It's a gentle reminder. Well, hey,
EAs are often the translator, right? Yeah. I think that there's a translation function because on the one hand, they spend the majority of their time with the C-suite in those discussions and privy to all of that. But they're also like the foot soldiers or they're part of the ranks, right? Yeah. So it's an interesting role that EAs have to play of being this kind of mitigator and translator between the two.
So hard. It really is so hard
it is.
To wear these hats and kind of be perceived, depending on who you're in front of. You could be perceived as no status and incredibly high status at the same time. And that's tough. That's just a really grueling day to go in and out of.
Yeah. Well said. So, okay. Crisis war room situations, because we get those too, right? I mean, we get the, oh my gosh, our CEO was just arrested for whatever, or there was some embezzlement thing, or there's a harassment scandal, or there was a security leak, or somebody said something in the press, a comment that didn't land well. Again, comms is
Yep.
everything, right? So there's a lot of war room scenarios. That's just tip of the iceberg. Or, the acquisition that we thought was going to go through and everybody was counting their stock and planning on that 7-figure house they were going to buy. And then the acquisition fell apart at the last minute, right? Like there's a million war room things that can happen. So in moments like that, how do you think an assistant can be helpful as well?
Ooh, I'm getting sweaty just hearing you spit out these examples. It's emotional. It's so emotional. Everyone's engaged emotionally and then trying to act logically. As an executive assistant, own your impact in that emotional puzzle and know that you do not have to mirror your executive. We are social creatures, so that's what happens. My executive, who my job relies on, if I'm not making them happy, making them perform better, I'm not doing my job. So it's really tempting to just mirror them. If they're bringing high anxiety, which again, they might not say they're bringing, they might say they're not emotional at all, but they're escalated, then my temptation is to match that and kind of bring frenetic energy. You don't have to do that. You can create the space and show. This is all about showing rather than you feel whatever you feel, but can you show external calm, which means as much stillness as possible, as much neutrality in your face as possible, just that openness. And this is a thing that's easier said than done because every cell in your body is going to want to escalate. And the more that you can remind yourself, I don't have to show the level of anxiety that I'm feeling, because your outward expression of emotion does influence the rest of the people in the room and the rest of the people in the company. An example of this, I always think of my favorite show of all time, Succession. And every single episode of Crisis, the executive assistant to Kendall Roy, Jess, has this kind of fast way of walking through halls and walking through the world, but she's pretty neutral in her expression. And that's something that executive assistants don't often realize. And honestly, executives don't often realize just the microscope they're under in a time of crisis, that it's not about the words you say. It's about what you're doing and your voice and your face and your body. So even something as simple as the boardroom that all the executives are in, the war room itself, as the EAs are coming and going, every single person in the company is noting their body language, how fast they're walking, their level of panic. So the best thing you can do is just be incredibly aware of what you're projecting and showing that oasis of calm. Show it, show it, show it. Another thing that's really helpful is having one sentence that you can say when you're asked about whatever the crisis is. Because that sentence may have gone through comms people and it might be something that the company has given everyone to say, but it might not be. It might be way too early for that, or the executive team has no idea what they can or can't say. And it's also important that this sentence be authentic to you. Because let's say, for example, something happens in the press, an executive says something, and now it's a huge story that you think is vile. You saw that comment and you were really upset by it personally. If you're running around and someone stops you and says, oh my gosh, what's going on with the thing? And you say, well, I just know that he meant well, or whatever. If you don't authentically mean that, we'll pick up on it. Human beings are really good at understanding those little notes of what we're expressing. So instead, what can you say? Even if it's something like a friend of mine who's an executive assistant, she'll just say, I've always experienced my executive team to try their very best for employees in the company. That's true to her, even if she doesn't agree with what's being said. That might not be the sentence that you would personally say, but what is something that you can say, even if it's just a crisp, confident, I really don't know what's going on yet, and I really can't comment on it. But say it confidently, because you'd be surprised with when emotions are high, it's hard to stop talking. It's hard to figure out your message. So just have that crisp something that you can say that you can mean. And then show that calm as much as you can.
And that stuttering, your point about being prepared. I really like that. And I think another thing for EAs to think about is, let's say we don't have that sentence as an executive team. We haven't arrived at that place. You taking it upon yourself to say, hey guys, we need a sentence. Like, we need a safe word, whatever it is, that we need this sentence. Here's what I think we can say as a group. here's what the comms team suggested. I approached them. Here's what they worked up. But I
Yeah.
think like these are again moments where you can demonstrate your value and where you start to elevate. And now it's, oh my gosh, look at how vital our assistant was in this moment. Remember how she helped us or he helped us with, reaching this point and getting us all aligned on this and the messaging. Like, I think these are ways that you can really, really display your centrality in all of this. So I
Yes.
really love the idea of having that sentence.
How should we talk about this? Here's my suggestion. Because again, it's like opening them to a question, not just dumping advice, which they'll be closed to, especially in a crisis. But how should we handle this? Here's my idea. They hate hearing just problems. So what's that question and a solution? That's a great way to frame it.
We talked a little bit about this in the beginning, but maybe to extrapolate a little bit more, like what are signs that you can clearly see when the audience is not with you or when the messaging is not resonating? Are we looking for surveys? Is this a feedback loop? Is this pulsing directors and managers of teams? Is this a body language scan? What are the ways that we're extracting this intel as executive assistants to be able to be that mirror?
Yeah, it's hard for me to picture the EA that gets to supporting an executive and doesn't have finely tuned skills on reading people. A lot of the reason you got to where you are was because you could anticipate every little thing that someone needs before they know they need it. Use those skills not just towards your executive, but towards the audience. The executive, let's say they're doing a town hall and it's virtual. They're not looking at all those tiles as they're speaking. Number one, I wouldn't recommend it. I would hope that they're looking into the camera to connect. But number two, there's just way too many things to focus on. So you can be that person who's scanning through, maybe it's hundreds of people. Can you scan through those tiles and see what is body language like? Are people closed off? Are they looking away from the camera, reading their emails, etc.? Are they nodding and smiling? What is the general tone of what's going on in the room? How many people have their camera on? Culture to culture, that's really different. So some companies, no camera on at all. This wouldn't count for them. But if people regularly have their camera on and it's off, that's a sign that they're not really engaged, they're not really listening. In person, of course, you can just scan deeply the audience, take that time to really look at each person and see, are there chunks of people, departments that are feeling one type of way versus another? Can you remind them of that group of people? Like, hey, can we speak more to finance next time? I noticed some of them were a little disengaged in this part. So you can really have those eyes out for people. Things like Slack, or a lot of companies use blind comments in an all hands. These are painful to read for executives. They don't want to do it. They'll just get defensive. They might be painful to read for you because usually you're on your executive's team and it's really hard to get that blind feedback. But reading it will be really helpful, not because you're just going to go tell your executive exactly what you saw, but because it'll give you a temperature of what's going on. I generally recommend that executives don't wait for surveys and formal touch points to get a sense of how things are landing, because by that time, the problem has escalated, usually. Yeah, so look for how you can be proactive around that. And then once you have those relationships across the company, you can just go to people and say, hey, how'd the all hands land for you? Or how'd the big rollout land? What did you think of how it was presented? Because if you're trusted as someone who doesn't just say exactly what you heard up the chain, but just kind of gets a sense and creates that space for people without defensiveness, and people are usually willing to express some level of, even if they're just like, it's good, that's not great. So you're kind of reading between the lines. What are people not saying? And how can you collect that? And then when the time is right, share it with your executive in some way or prompt them to think about it in some way.
I'm curious, as you mentioned, oftentimes these messages are delivered virtually and, scanning a virtual room versus being in person. Have you noticed in your work that there's a marked difference when a sensitive communication is delivered in person versus virtually?
Yeah, it's so complicated. Virtual delivery is hard and it's reality at this point. I I can't remember the last time I worked with an executive who could be in the room with every single person that worked with them at any given time. It's just not reality. So while in person is better in a lot of ways, there are things about virtual that are helpful. If you're delivering bad news or what might be perceived as bad news, even if you don't view it as bad news, then virtual can give people time to process, time to think, time to step away and do something else and reconnect when they feel more clear about it. So there are positives and negatives to both situations. I think now executives are empowered to succeed in either one. It's just being really strategic that you're not just doing what you would do in person virtually. It has to be a shorter amount of time. You have to be strategic about how much extra information slides you show. You have to know that people are checking their email whenever they get even a tiny bit bored. When I'm 8 out of 10 engaged, I'll check my email. So those kinds of realities are very important, but you can succeed in both situations.
I've noticed, for instance, with my own company, we've done SKOs virtually and we've done SKOs in person. And that's like one example of, I think, a critical moment where you're really trying to align, you're really trying to drive impact, create energy, motivation, enthusiasm, build, right? And we've done these virtual SKOs and I'll get off the meeting and I'll go, oh, I think that went terrible. Like I just felt like I was looking at a wall of faces and there was not that moment that grab you moment that goes, yes, this is good. This is being well received. This is going to catalyze people. And so this year, probably because we've had some that felt kind of like they fell flat, we decided to do it in person. And definitely like the tangible feel goods were so much more apparent. But to your point, Eliza, those things are so hard to orchestrate. And we're a small company. We're, no more than 20 people. And just getting 20 people together from multiple states was a lot and hard to do. So, of course, if you're talking on the scale of thousands, that's just impossible. But it really is, it's a lot to bridge that and to really think about how to distill the narrative and consider the context, in doing that.
Yeah. At this point, because we can meet virtually so easily, I tell my clients that the only reason to meet in person is connection, human connection. So they'll have a whole list of things they want to mobilize as part of their meeting. And that's great under the umbrella of connection. So we want to think of it first, because otherwise people are like, yeah, I could have heard all of that from my couch. And they might be incorrect because they'll get less of the message from their couch, but they're going to be saying that. They're going to be pushing back in that way. So it's like, to make it worth it, it has to feel like human connection, time to connect, build relationships, meet the person across the organization that has the same role as you, who you never work with, and trade stories, vent with each other. That's what makes people feel good about the year, rather than, oh, that keynote speaker, what a great speaker. It's like, can we find those places of connection?
Which brings me to my next question. You just highlighted, meet people across the org. I'm curious about, what are the challenges that you see and what are the solutions that you recommend for carrying a message across an organization, right? When it's one thing to be a company of my size, 20 people. We all fit in a room, no problem. But when you're talking about major change, major narrative shifts, major communication, strategic shifts, how do you do that at a scale of a company that's 6,000 people or 10,000 people, right? What are the strategies that you recommend? And because this is, of course, an audience of executive assistants, what is the role that the EA plays in that?
Yeah, it's so hard. 6,000 people, thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. There are whole teams devoted to this for a reason. What I will say is that there tends to be disconnect between, again, what the executives think the timeline is, how fast they think it'll spread through the organization, and the reality. So the expectation I would always set is repeat it till you're blue in the face. Repeat it till you're blue in the face. They forgot. repeat it till you're blue in the face. And that's true of EAs because they're going to have to repeat it not only to the people they meet with, the people they function with across the organization, but they're going to have to repeat it to their executive. They're going to have to say, is this an opportunity to underscore the change narrative? Or should we level this with the change narrative messaging we've already created? Because unless your executive is a chief communications officer, they have other priorities that have already washed away. They're like, yeah, we did that. We had the meetings. We're good. And they need a lot of reminders that this is a huge priority, how we're communicating it and how much we communicate it. If you feel like you've said it so much that everyone's rolling their eyes, it might be breaking through down the chain. A lot of my clients refer to the frozen middle as where messages go to die, the mid-managers. So let's say we've got the C-suite, SVPs, VPs, senior directors, then the message starts to freeze and it just doesn't make it out to the tendrils of the organization. So that's the place that as an EA, you can ask those questions and say, what are we doing to empower managers to have these conversations? How about I organize an event for them, whether it's a 2-hour Zoom call or it's an in-person event, so that they can understand the reason behind the change, the frequently asked questions that they'll hear, the timeline. I mean, something like the timeline executives are like, yeah. And then there's March, this happens, April, that really matters for the bottom levels of the organization because they're just trying to wrap their mind around it. So you can be that voice of like, what's the timeline? Where's the FAQ sheet? A lot of EAs know enough at this point to draft one themselves and run it by an executive. That way you can just shoot it out to people whenever a manager's like, oh, I'm getting questions about this. You're like, oh, here we go. We've got it. So as much as you can proactively see those challenges coming, have timeline, FAQs, messaging ready, and just remind your executive that it's going to be a long road, a lot of repetition, and repetition for you as well.
Right. I think what I'm hearing a lot in your recommendations is this whole idea of proactivity and anticipation and knowing that this information is likely to trigger this type of anxiety or this type of response or these types of concerns. And so how do we mitigate that? And like you said, people's concerns pretty much pool in the same kinds of categories of, how does this impact me? How does this impact my livelihood? How does this impact my security? Like these types of things. So if we can pool those generalized concerns and plan for that and proactively address those things, that's like we're winning. We're way ahead of the game.
Yeah, every comms officer will love you if you already have prepared. How is this going to impact our team? How is it going to impact their stock options? How is it going to impact their job security? And I wouldn't recommend a CEO just come out and say, like, this is how it's going to impact your job security. But knowing that and having the thread, this is what the vast majority of audiences internally care about. So you have to do what you can to make sure the message prioritizes those things.
So if you could leave our listeners with one thing, one actionable takeaway that they can apply or start applying today to be a stronger steward of the story and of narrative, what would that one thing be?
It's own your impact that you can make within your executive and your organization. I work with a ton of EAs. I think they just represent kind of the very foundation of an organization. Even if their work isn't seen, it's the foundation. And because EAs are in service to their executive, sometimes they underestimate the impact that they can have. Even if that impact comes from keeping your ear to the ground, asking questions, setting the emotional tone in a room and doing what you can to impact that. Know that you do have impact. You do have influence in the executives and in the company overall, and act accordingly. Part of that impact is what levels up. I always think of every job, every industry has a moment where everything that got you to where you are is suddenly, almost overnight, irrelevant, flips on its head. And now you have to do everything differently to get to the next level. And with EAs, it tends to be a lot of people pleasers get to the point where you can anticipate everyone's need and make everyone happy. And then suddenly you're at this level where if you don't find a way to switch from just making them feel good, making them feel comfortable, almost like a magician, to putting them in discomfort that's going to help them succeed, then there's just going to be that ceiling there. And so part of owning your impact is just seeing like, what influence can you have in empowering this executive to grow themselves? Because if you help them go to new heights, that relationship is just going to be deeper. It's going to be more like a partnership than an executive assistant relationship. And that's where the great stuff happens. But it takes a little bit of risk, and it takes knowing that you're not just along for this ride, you're a key part of it.
Being comfortable with assuming a level of risk is something I've heard consistently in today's discussion. Yeah.
Yeah. And I know that there's people listening to this that are like, if I did that, I'd be fired on the spot. So please know that you're the expert of your relationship with your executive, and you have to there's so much to balance as an EA.
There's a lot
and you
to
have to think of all
balance,
those things. But what does stretch look like for them?
Yeah.
It's the stretch zone, not the panic zone. So you're always looking to stretch them a little bit, but not so far that they panic or retaliate. And that's going to be different for each executive.
Yeah.
But knowing what you know, how can you get them to that
Well, and
stretch
it's also
zone?
positioning, which is where we started the conversation around, building enough goodwill, enough inherent goodwill and good karma points in the relationship so that when those moments of challenge arise, the relationship is really well grounded and nurtured in this kind of, fodder of goodwill.
You can repair, and some of the best, deepest relationships that I have in my work are the ones that something was a little off one day, and then one of us went in the room and said, hey, I don't think that hit you right, and I'm so sorry. Here's what I will and won't do going forward. And then suddenly, it's uncomfortable, but it gets deeper. And the same thing can happen with these relationships. Just own it. This is a really close relationship in a lot of ways.
Yeah. 100%.
Has power.
I like that. So tell us a little bit more about your work, Eliza, and what does an engagement with you look like? Can it be like a one-time thing? Is it like a major, we're working together for 2 years? What is the kind of that spectrum of situations and timeframes look like that you support?
Yeah. Most of the work that we do is one-on-one coaching with executives. Often that looks like event-based coaching. So there's a SKO, like you mentioned, and we'll make sure that maybe I'm working with 5 executives, making sure that they align with the overall message, that their own messages align for kind of a deadline event. But then a lot of it's ongoing one-on-one coaching of just getting to know what's coming up for you. Any executive has a million things coming up that they need messaging help on. So I'm the person who will maybe meet with them for 2 hours a month and just say, what's coming up? What is your listener analysis? What's the big message that you're landing? What do you want them to see, feel, and think differently as the result of this? Just kind of get them that devoted time where they're out of their calendar and into strategic thinking around their communications. So those are 2 of the major things that we do. Also, just kind of strategic messaging work. I love getting a whole C-suite in a room so that we can brainstorm how we're going to approach a product rollout, an acquisition. How are we thinking about this broadly and building strategic comms plans from there?
Yeah. And do you work with clients that also have their own comms teams, or are you sort of the outsourced comms expert?
Yeah, we do work alongside comms teams often because comms teams are looking internally. They're looking to kind of support the business. And oftentimes I'll support individuals within that larger plan.
Okay.
So coaching them on really how are they coming across in this speech, presentation, interview, media event, and making sure that it kind of aligns with the comms team larger goal.
Great. And how can people get in touch or reach you?
Super easy, Eliza@decker.com, Eliza @Decker. You can also find me on LinkedIn. I love connecting with people. If you have a question, something coming up, hey, this is happening with my executive, can you give me some tips? If I have time in my week, I will respond. And this stuff, I love what I do. So Send it to me. And if I have the bandwidth, I'm happy to chat.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you for that for our listeners as well. So, final question. Normally our guests are executive assistants. Normally we ask them who they would support and why. I'm not going to ask you that because you're not an assistant. But I would like to ask you, what is your favorite example of like a really powerful narrative or some kind of oratory, something or other that you've witnessed that really mobilized action or that you think landed in a particularly exciting and meaningful way?
Yeah, what comes to mind is Airbnb during the pandemic in 2020. I know we don't like to think about that time very often, but it was a huge change management moment for most companies. I don't have to tell you all that. Just right.
Lived it. Yeah.
Lived it. Terrible. Still have scars. Still recovering. Brian Chesky, CEO of Airbnb, had to lay off, I don't remember the percentage, a lot of the company. Big layoffs. Because, of course, travel just fell out. It was gone. And there's a few things that set them up for success and how he did that I thought was really impressive at the time. Number one, just emotional transparency about it. He led with accountability. Like, I have made decisions that have led us to this point. Obviously, you can't predict a giant pandemic taking out our specific business, but he owned those decisions and owned the decision to lay people off, which is huge because a lot of people try to lead with kind of punting that or acting like it couldn't happen any other way. So just owning that, huge for the transparency and emotion. He spoke emotionally about it, even externally. And matching that message internally and externally is so important these days. A pet peeve of mine is divided internal and external comms approaches. Or like they're not only different departments, but they're on separate sides of the organization because every message is public now. So we need to be thinking of it consistently. And that is what they did.
In perpetuity as well.
It lives in perpetuity. It's there. And your company, the people that work for you are the best ambassadors of your brand. So of course we want to empower them to speak externally. So yeah, he did that. He's had the same message externally as internally, showed that care, had a plan, a timeline, processes. This is what we're going to do for the people that we laid off. This is what we're going to do internally, deadlines, timelines for all of that. Kept to their word, and they saw not only that the company turned around, stock price bounced back, all of that good stuff, but that the internal rapport of the business didn't suffer as much as it really should in a situation like that. I love that story just because it underscores kind of like an unmitigated bad situation. Like not a single person would say, we can message our way out of this. It's going to be bad regardless. But there's things that we can do in ways that we can own it and speak emotionally that will allow people to move through that challenge. And that's what great crisis comms does.
Yeah. I guess preserving humanity in that moment and offering humanity, but also like exiting that situation with leading with humanity, I think was really central to that success. You were saying one of the things that made it so powerful for you was the fact that he... there was a level of contrition in his messaging. And I think that that's oftentimes not necessarily encouraged in messaging.
Or executives just don't view it. It's all or nothing. It's like either I take personal responsibility for this and then it's all my fault, or I have to kind of blame the air and the sunlight and the powers that be. And there is a huge middle ground there of just owning your piece of this and decisions made along the way, either as the executive team or as an individual. It's powerful because people want to connect with you as a human. And it's rare that an executive does too much of that. It's much more common that they kind of strip their own humanity because it's vulnerable being in front of people. So we like to hide ourselves. We like to hide behind jargon, abstractions, business language. But just saying to people, I'm so sorry it's come to this. Mean it. And then we might be able to move on. Maybe not all of us. It's never going to please everybody, but more people will be able to process through and move on.
Right. Such a good conversation, Eliza. Thank you so much.
Fun to chat.
I knew it was going to be good, and you delivered.
Thank you. So fun to be with you.
Yeah, this was a really great perspective. And I love this idea of owning your impact. And I think it's a lot of takeaways from today's discussion around how EAs can really use their role as a platform to drive change and really be effective and be such a vital resource. It's a really, really beautiful reminder of the vitality of this position. So thank you for that. Eliza@decker.com again, for those who would like to reach out to her. I think there's probably a lot of you who potentially may have things brewing that could benefit from someone like Eliza. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you to all the EAs who've helped me schedule many, many things over the years. I appreciate you and for pushing your executives to actually come to those meetings.
Yeah.
You're the real MVP. Thank you.
Thank you.
Reach is brought to you by Maven Recruiting Group, who specializes in placing executive assistants and support staff to the Bay Area's most prominent executives and companies. If you've enjoyed being part of our podcast community and are interested in becoming part of our candidate community, we're currently hiring for roles in San Francisco, Silicon Valley, and Los Angeles. You can visit us at www.mavenrec.com to see some of the roles we're currently working on and to submit your resume.